Hey everybody, my favorite thing to do with sourdough is to make pizza dough balls. That's actually why I got started in this to begin with and how I first started making bread. So we're going to make two videos. We're going to make pizza dough balls today, and then we'll actually look at how to cook pizzas. I have a little oven outside that's gas powered that I use for cooking my pizzas, but I'll show you how to do it in the oven, which is good. It's not great, but it's good, very good. But first, we want to talk about formulas. So Sophia's going to come over here with me, and the reason I want to talk about this is because people are always asking me, can you give me a recipe for 6 pizza balls? Can you give me a recipe for this or that or whatever? And once you get used to the idea that if you're happy with flour, water, salt, and sourdough starter for your recipe, and you don't need things like sugar or butter in it, it's really pretty simple. So what I'm doing today is first deciding how much sourdough I need, how much starter I need, and I say, well, I've got 6 dough balls that I need to make, and each of them are going to be 250 grams, so that's 1,500 grams, and I want 20% of the total volume of dough to be starter. Then I multiply the 1,500 gram total by 20%, and I get 300 grams. So then I'm going to make my pre-ferment, which is my sourdough starter, out of 300 grams. But, and this is really important, I'm going to add 150 to this because I still need to put something back in the refrigerator so that I have some starter for the next time that I want to make pizza or make bread. Okay, so here's how the formula works. Baker's percentages are always based off of 100% flour. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, I want flour, obviously, and then this is a 60% hydration. It's a pretty dry dough compared to the artisan loaves that we make, which are like 72, 75%. And then 2% salt is kind of standard for a lot of these things. So if you add up the percentages, you get 162%. Well, what does that mean? Well, this is how we actually go about the math. We know that our total from here, 6 dough balls at 1,500 grams is 1,500. So we divide 1,500 grams by 1.62, and we get the amount of flour that we need. Let me say that again. So we take the total weight, we divide it by the percentages of everything that's in this, all based on flour, which is 162%, and we get 926, and there was a bunch of stuff, but if we're close to a gram, we're fine. So then to get the water amount, we just take 60% of the flour, and we've got our percentage of water. And then 2%, again, is, excuse me, 18.5. So what do we do with that? We take these numbers then, the flour and water, and we subtract the amount of flour and water, which we know is 150 grams and 150 grams from each of these, and we get our final dough calculation. So this one looks like 776 grams of flour, 405 grams of water, 18.5 grams of salt, and I don't round on the salt because it's more precise. And then I always have my backup just as I spoon it in to kind of make sure that I'm close and I didn't really goof something up. And then all of the starter. And there we are. The total is still 1,500 grams. So we're going to take just a second. I'm going to bring everything out. We'll look at how our starter looks, and then we'll start mixing everything together in step 1 of forming our dough for the pizza balls. So before we go any further, I need to mention that the pizza that we're making today is we're not doing a strict Neapolitan pizza where there's the marinara or the margherita. These are certainly Americanized, but the crust is very much the standard Neapolitan pizza dough. So if you want to make something that has like loads of toppings on it, this is not your dough. If you want to cook something in a wood-fired oven or in a really hot, as hot as we can get this oven, in 90 seconds, then this is the dough that you're looking for. So first things first, our starter's in great shape. This has been I fed it about 6 hours ago, and you can see that it's risen. It hasn't yet fallen. It's not covered in bubbles. So at this point, it's really at its strongest and its greatest capability of raising a loaf of bread. So we're going to measure that first, and then mix in the rest of the ingredients that I've already got measured out. So we need 300 grams of starter, and then the rest of this will go in the fridge. You know, obviously we could make a loaf of bread out of this right now too, or we could do something else. So I'm just watching my scale, and where are we at? 257. Let's put a little too much. So we want 300, and that's a bit more than we need. 318. And if we're a couple grams off, well, you know, one way or the other, that's fine. So that's 301. So then the rest of this, I'm just going to stir out the bubbles, pop this in the fridge when we're done, and that's good for 3 more days. We could make bread out of this on Thursday, so we could make bread, you know, on Sunday morning if we wanted. After that, I'd refresh it before using it. Okay, so we're done measuring things here because I've already measured out the flour, water, and salt. So the water is about 90 degrees. I wouldn't go any hotter than that, but it kind of helps to get things rolling if the water is a little warmer. And I definitely measure that with the Thermopen. So I don't know if you have one of these. My refrigerator actually makes warm water, and it's pretty accurate, but if you don't, you know, just heat it up a little bit. You can go by feel, but at 115 degrees, you're going to kill the yeast. So it's better to go with cold water and a little longer rising time than to overheat it. Better by a long shot. Okay, so as we did before when we made the artisan bread, I'm going to take all of the salt that we have. I'm going to take a spoonful or two of the flour and just put that in there. It'll make it easier to mix in the salt. And then at this point, you know, all of this can go in. It's not going to be hard to mix. This is a much drier dough, as I said, a much lower hydration dough than the artisan loaves that we were using. And because I really need to make sure that the gluten's really developed, we're actually going to mix this differently. So I am going to mix it like this, just for a couple of minutes, and then let it sit for half an hour or an hour. Depends on what we end up doing here in the house. But we want that autolyse to work on the gluten development, but also, you know, give in fact, more importantly, give the wild yeast in our sourdough starter a chance to start working at fermenting before we add the salt. So I'm going to just keep mixing this a little bit more, but we're going to stop the video, and then we'll come back when it's time to mix this in half an hour. Okay, we're back, and the beginnings of our dough has been here for about a half an hour. So what we're going to do now is mix in the flour and the salt, and then I said we're going to do something different. This is what I often use. If I'm going to try to use this pizza dough today, then I definitely have to knead it. I was going to say need to knead it, but that sounds a little funny. So I have to knead this because I need the gluten development to happen. And because this is not a wet dough and because it's not sitting around for a long time, it doesn't happen naturally just by coming together by itself. So I would either have to knead all of this by hand, or I could use a mixer, but this is too much dough for my standard KitchenAid bowl. So what I do is I divide it into 3 or 4 different chunks, and I give it a quick spin in this, and it does 80% of what the mixer does really fast. And then I just knead the 4 different chunks of those together when I'm done. So all of the remaining flour and salt goes in now, and I'll just kind of pinch some of this in and get it distributed a little bit. But honestly, if I have a whole bunch of it and I don't get it mixed in equally, I'm not really worried about that because, like I said, I'm going to need all of this when it's done. But you can see already that this dough is a lot drier, a lot lower hydration than our artisan loaves, like I said. So, like I said, I'm just going to kind of turn this into like maybe 3 chunks today. These feel like a reasonable size. So I'll often do this when I have a huge amount of dough that I'm making for, you know, if I have a dozen people over or something. It's obviously way too much dough for any stand mixer. So this is pretty cool. So just lock this down, turn it on for 10 to 15 seconds, and this will start to come together, start to form a ball, and that's really all I need. I don't want to over mix this, and then you should be really careful when you do this. I pull it out by the blade. Oh, if you have a dough hook, I don't see any advantage to those at all. And I've read some people who've tried them and like them, but most people say just use the metal one. So then I'm going to go on to the next one. Oops, after I put the dough hook back in. And a little of this flour from the bottom of the bowl. And again, I'm not worried about being too precise because I'm going to knead them all together equally when I'm done. But this is doing 90% of the kneading for me. And when we're done with this, we'll set the dough aside for its first rise. And after that first rise, then I'll take it out and form them into the pizza balls, which we'll come back and show you also. So, we'll just finish this together. See, I forgot to put the blade back in again. I do that a lot. Of that flour and salt goes on the side. Mix this up for a sec. And we'll knead it together. Alright, so this is obviously easier to handle than our super wet artisan loaf that we made the other day. And if you haven't checked out the other videos in the series, definitely do, because I'm kind of talking about some things as if you know, as if I've said them to you before already. So this one series is just based on sourdough. So I'm just going to give it a quick knead. And again, the only purpose in this is just making sure that those different mixes that I did in the food processor are now kind of united. All right, and that, honestly, is plenty good enough for the time being. So I'm going to put a bit of spray oil in this, cover it for an hour. I'll probably do a stretch and fold, as we talked about in some of those other videos. Probably do that again after the second hour. I'll see how it feels. Maybe we'll record it, and then we'll come back and cut this into dough balls. Okay, so we're back, and it's been about 3 hours since we first finished mixing this and kneading it. And so I'm just going to put a tiny bit of flour on the top of this and turn it out onto another tiny bit of flour that's already on here. So this dough's a lot easier to work with than the the higher hydration dough. And when I was stretching it out, it's a lot easier to stretch out and it doesn't stick very easily or anything. I don't want to get a bunch of flour on the top of this, and you'll see why in just a second. But I do have the scale here, so I'm going to turn that on. And if you remember, for us, we're making 6 dough balls. So I'm going to cut this in half. And then if you ever get a chance to see some videos of real people in places like Naples, where they do this every day and they make tons of dough balls, they'll just grab this and they'll pinch it and form it into a perfectly sized 250 gram dough ball. I, of course, have to measure this, so this is a wild guess. That's 260, so I'm just going to lop a little bit of that off. and if I'm somewhere close between 245 and 255, I'm gonna leave it. So then with this, we don't want to have too much flour on it because we do really want it to be a nice tight ball. And I'm actually more concerned about these than I am a typical like artisan loaf because they're so wet they're going to stick together. These I definitely don't want to open up, so I'm just going to grab the floury, prettier side and just kind of pre-pinch this a little bit like that, and then let it sit while I measure the rest of them. So if there are big bubbles on them, I try to work those over toward the inside and pop them. My crazy wife is standing behind my daughter trying to make me laugh. I'm going to let these rest for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to just tighten those up and stick them in the pan. So I just wiped the flour off the counter, washed my bowl, and I'm back. It's been like 4 minutes. So these actually seem really good. If they were opened up on the bottom, then I would probably give them a nice flourless push with my hand to kind of tighten up the bottom and give that a pinch if I needed it. But these look pretty good. And so I'm just gonna see that one's a little looser than I'd like. And so what I'm doing is I'm pushing the dough against the counter and just kind of pinching it with the bottom of my hand as I push, and I keep rolling like that. And if I have to, I'll even give it a little pinch on the bottom. Are you laughing because I said pinch on the bottom? There's just children in here, and it's not the one behind the camera, or the counter. Okay, so yeah, these look pretty good. Like I said, if this is too floury, then you can't do this. You just have to pinch and close with your hand. But so these are going to go inside this. I don't even have a proper pizza proofing tray, and if you're watching this, I'm guessing you don't either. But they're fine in here, and so I'm going to dust them a little bit with flour, mostly to keep the plastic that I'm going to put them in from sticking to this, because that would be a mess. And also, they're not crowded now. I'll often get like 9 of these in here, and then they'll stick together on the inside. So that's the other reason that I dust them. And then I just have a food-safe plastic bag. This happens to be, they sell these bags that you can cook a turkey in the whole oven. I've never done that, but they're really nice food-safe plastic bags, and they last for a long time. So I'll use these, and then after I'm done, I'll rewash them, and then I'm good. So I want this dough to be at room temperature for about 7 hours before I start baking. So it's already been 3. I'm going to leave them out for another hour tonight. That's 4. I'm going to put them in the refrigerator. I could use them in 3 hours, but it'd be too late to make pizza. And I actually like the full 24 hours of fermentation. So I'm going to put them in the fridge 3 hours before I'm ready to make pizza. Then I'm going to take them out. And there's a bit of leeway. So if it's 7 or 8 or 9 hours total, by the time I actually make the pizza, it's still going to be good. So with that, we're going to stop this episode, and we will make a new one about actually baking the pizza. Thanks for joining us.